Welcome to the International Pinnacle Roundtable Talks. Hey, everybody. Does the DPC work, or do we need to burn it all down and start all over again?
Well, since you put it that way.
Yes, Kim, tell us how you really feel.
Nah, I actually don't. Yeah, well, on a bad day, I do feel like burning it all down, because when it's bad, I think it's really bad. But generally speaking, I think the circuit in itself, it's kind of nice, actually. Like just having like a bit of structure. And I think, obviously, I know this is going to come up multiple times probably throughout this episode. We're going to compare it to other esports titles in their circuits. But if you look at other circuits, like having this sort of like structure is really good for the ecosystem in general, because it benefits sort of like everybody, your players, teams, organizers, sponsors, brands. Like pretty much everybody has like sort of a talents as well. Everybody has sort of like a rhythm, and they know kind of what's happening. The problem is that, working with Valve can kind of take the rhythm out of things, and I'm sure that that everybody here who's worked with Valve and worked in the Dota ecosystem has felt the kind of pains of trying to work with Valve and trying to make sure that they plan ahead, which can't really work. It's October, and we don't really know we don't really 100% know the plans for next year. We know the rough dates, and I think that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, this is the first year where we actually know a little bit about the following season before the season starts. And I want to disagree in some way. I want to say that the idea of the DPC, the structure that it brings, is good, but the execution and the adjustments made over the last couple of years that we've seen has mostly been like all over the place, or non-existent, or bad. Each year the iterations have not really got us closer to what is perfect.
So you said over the past several years, I've asked a lot of players this question, but you know what? We got Ponlo here. Everyone tells me that the chaos year where there were like 20-something DPC tournaments was the best year that players loved the most. And we got to hear from Ponlo. What's the year that the DPC felt the best from a player perspective?
Even when there were 20 tournaments, I wasn't getting to any of them, so I don't really know.
But you had more chances to get to them, right?
More chances to feel pain. To be honest, for me, I think back to the time when there were like Star Ladder lands, and there were like Star Ladder their own battle passes and stuff, and they were actually like people were buying the Star Ladder passes, even though it's not like official, like part of the Valve game or whatever. I feel like during that time things were pretty good to me as a player, but I'm not sure about the big picture.
What was that Beyond the Summit courier that everyone went crazy over with the Summit Battle Pass? Husky?
Yeah.
The Elgato or something.
Yeah, you could also choose which was the last team to make it into the event, because IG like dressed up as maids as like a reward for the people who voted for them. That was quite a while ago.
I remember that.
That was pre-DPC, right?
That was pre-DPC. That was the Wild West.
Yeah, back when TI invites made no sense. So, Noxville, when you're saying that they've made changes over the years, what's the year that you think they like started at an okay point and then we haven't iterated well from? Just to clarify for everybody.
Okay, so there was the Wild West, which was early on. No one knew exactly what would get you to TI. There were, I think, mostly very good invites, but it was just from a player perspective, there was a lot of pressure. So I'm sure Kips can tell you there was 2015 or 16 when 16 when Na'Vi got invited over Fnatic, and it was like basically it was very close between them, but Fnatic were better. And then it went into one last LAN where Fnatic, Liquid was sick, Fata was ill, and someone played, and then Fnatic played them, and it was a disaster at that time. And for some reason, Na'Vi made it to the finals, because in their group there wasn't this disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
And then as a result, Fnatic didn't get invited, had to qualify, Na'Vi got invited. It just seemed there wasn't a lack of transparency in the issue. Players were stressed out. So 2017, 2018 is the season we were talking about when the DPC kind of first started. There were all these events. The problem really there was it was kind of foreseeable what the problems are going to be. If we sat down, the five of us, we could have written out 10 problems that are going to come. There's going to be lots of invites to certain teams. There's going to be too many events so that like you can't make 2 in a row. Visa issues would be a problem. Kips can say something about that. Maybe I think she was affected when she was in Vegas Squadron because she couldn't go to the one GSC.
Correct.
The formats were all kind of like very bland and simple, and let's just get through this as fast as possible. There was basically all the prize money was either major or minor, and there was no like room to have, we want to have 500,000, we want to have 600,000. Only very few events deviated from the million or 300,000. So that was the first year. It was better than the Wild West because there was transparency, there was objectivity, but there were so many problems that could have been avoided. Then the next year they say, okay, we're going to change it. We're going to only have minor, major, minor, major, minor, major. We're going to limit the number of slots. That was probably okay, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people thought that was pretty good. And then that's happened again in the 2019-2020 season, which got cut short because of COVID. And now we are post-COVID, and there are regional regional qualifiers through these leagues. And when it was first announced, everyone was like, 6 weeks is pretty long. There's no real space for third-party events. So they said, okay, well, we'll take all your feedback and we'll iterate for the next season, which was the 2021-2022 season. Nothing really happened. It was exactly the same. And now, from what we know for next season, this is the last one. From what we know next season, they are making one change. They're making the league shorter, 3 weeks only, but the prize money is staying the same. If you're last place in second division, you get 0 money for playing for that time. So they take the improvements very, very slowly. And because this affects the livelihoods of players, that's kind of a big problem.
So Kips, Noxville just gave us this great layout. You have experienced the gambit of all of these systems. Moved from coaching, talent, stats, right? A lot of different roles as well. What are the strengths of next season, right? And what do you think is still absolutely lacking?
I mean, next season is going to be great in the sense that it's much shorter. Like, I think a lot of players have had trouble this year, especially now that the Dota 2 pro base players are getting older, people are getting families, people are having things to, they want to go back to. They can't sit at a boot camp for 6 weeks playing 1 game a week. It's just not feasible if you have literal kids. And I think it's also healthy for the ones without kids to have a life outside of Dota, and it becomes very, very hard if this is your match load. So yeah, the shortening is good. I still would also want to argue that I want a higher match load in general. Like, now you're going to play 2 games a week. I think that's still not enough, honestly.
I've seen a lot of discussion about meta and the way it moves and how much time you have to prepare for matches really having a different effect on teams, because regional leagues, teams get the whole week to prepare for one best of 3. But then you hit a LAN and you've got to play multiple teams all the time, and teams aren't really ready for that. So I also find it super weird that the regional leagues don't actually match the experience of those teams got through that system, but now they're at the major and they haven't been tested in the kind of playing that they have to do at the major. So it seems weird to have them qualify in a different style than what they play in at the LAN.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I think that is just a question of the sport maturing more, right? Like, if you qualify for the World Championships in, say, football, you're also going to be playing a lot more all of a sudden than you normally did. Maybe not as drastically, but you're always going to speed up for an event, right? But the thing that I more want to go to is what you said about the metagame, right? I think the metagame moves a lot slower if there is only 1 game a week, if you only have to reveal the things that you're doing once a week. And you can also get messed up a lot more by bad style matchups or by a lack of knowledge of another team. You only get to play them once. So I do think that playing more often and playing the same teams more often, like in a shorter span of time, is going to bring a lot of pace back to the developments of the meta. Because right now I feel like within a patch, the developments go really very slowly. And if I still were coaching, that I would find that great, because we'd have more time to focus on like the comms and the strategy aspect of the game, like the deeper understanding. But from a viewer point of view, everything looks more and more the same because everybody figures out the right playstyle and then all teams pick the same heroes. And we just do that until somebody makes a breakthrough or needs to make a breakthrough because they're finally playing the one team that they needed to beat this season.
So logistically, you amp up the number of games that are played. You have to have longer days. You have to have multiple streams. Skim, let's talk tournament organizer logistics. We've talked about players, a little bit about talent. If you're a TO yourself and you're trying to run this 3-week operation, run a lot more games, does that make you happier or less happy to condense things and increase game count?
To a certain degree, kind of both. I think at the end of the day, you do want to definitely run more games because you can sell it to more sponsors. But at the same time, that's ultimately one of the big problems in Dota, in the Dota ecosystem anyway, right? Like trying to find ways and avenues to make it a little bit more profitable for everybody. Because that's I think this is a big part of what's often ignored when we talk about these sort of like formats is like how good can you sell this to sponsors and to brands to actually make it lucrative, or not necessarily lucrative, but at least sort of like even it out. And without having like a proper format and without having like sort of like a regular schedule, which we now have, luckily, it's really difficult to actually convince anybody to buy into Dota, into the Dota ecosystem. So right now, I probably, if we do, since we do already have the schedule for the next season, I definitely want more games as a tournament organizer, because at the end of the day, you have to have the broadcast ready for like the whole one best of 3 anyway, and adding like a second best of 3 to that is really not going to be that big of an issue. It's going to come to a pain point once you have like a 4th best of 3 and you're like cramming it all into one day, because then people are suddenly going into overtime and needing to work like 12 to 14 hour days. But you definitely want to have like a packed schedule for a day, because preparing everything for the broadcast is going to take a lot of time anyway. And then just, again, adding like another best of 3 to that is really not going to change that much. So for sure, you would want more games. And at the end of the day, it's also more watch hours that you can sell to brands, right? And it's, again, sort of like easy content to sell to brands. So I think, yeah, you'd definitely be more happy with more games.
And so obviously sponsors fund a huge portion of the Dota ecosystem, and we don't have to go into how much we would love Battle Pass sales to assist with that. So we weren't so reliant on third party, but that might be 3 hours of separate discussion we don't need to get into. But the question I want to follow up with, so sponsorship for regional leagues, right? Makes a lot of sense. Selling broadcast hours, you have reliability. But we look at the CSGO scene. They don't have TI, but they do have 2 massive majors, right? That these big sponsors buy into and you're actually able to fund. Whereas the majors for Dota right now maybe don't have the same prestige and are potentially a lot harder to sell. So we can come at this from whatever angle we want to, right? Like players versus TOs versus talent. But what would happen if Valve poured more into the majors? Like, would that give us the warm fuzzies, or do we not want to be CSGO?
I can say one thing is that the one thing you have to say when you look at CSGO isn't just that there's 2 majors and not one big TI, but in terms of the hype around the qualifiers for the majors, it's pretty awesome, really. They have these RMR events where it's a huge number of teams playing in a huge it's like 16 teams playing in a Swiss system. It feels more hype. It feels more, you can see the results as results are coming in, more outcomes for like the top few teams are going to be going in as legends. The next teams are going to be qualifying. So every match matters. And I guess that's one of the problems when it was over 6 weeks, is that you felt the first 2 weeks of matches matter a huge amount, but because you don't know how much it matters later on, you don't really care as much. And then later on, you get to the end of the season and you're like, oh, damn, we could have qualified if we just beat Goon Squad in week 1 or something. Like that's like the reality for some of the teams. So like the stakes are more immediate. And as a result, it feels kind of more like building up hype. I guess it's also the fact that because the majors in CSGO matter so much that they each regarded as like a mini TI. But that's like the problem if you think about it when you look at the Dota 2 ecosystem, this thing which people have been saying forever, is that because TI matters so much, everything else doesn't matter. And yeah, like no one really cares about how good Secret were for 6 months online. You know, they set records for how insane their statistics were. They beat NA teams, EU teams, and CIS teams because of during COVID, they were in like a fortunate region to play multiple regions. They were absolutely dominant. Their streak got broken by Unique Gaming. Otherwise, it would have been insane. And yeah, like no one cares about that really because they didn't win TI. And that's really what it boils down to. Whereas the majors, when you start talking about a specific team, people are always talking about how many majors you made it to, how many major finals you made it to. Even though the format and the structure is worse in terms of like statistically determining a winner, you know, some of the majors are single elimination and you have dubious ways in which you can get there. In the same way we had Adfinum who made it to the grand finals of a Dota major. But yeah, the hype is just easier to maintain the momentum and it just seems nicer. It seems more natural like that.
Yeah, I have a personal note here as well, is that it's hard to look back on my Dota career as like a coach and feel content about it, even though I've taken a bunch of lineups or tournaments where, frankly, we had absolutely no business being. But the fact that you get there, like you're supposed to feel some sort of accomplishment from that. And instead, if I look at Vega Squadron, especially, like I did so much work there. I put in all of the hours. We got a couple of majors with a lineup that, you know, the only one that's still in the business right now in a good way is Zayats. Yeah, but we didn't make TI. And nobody remembers, not even me. And that feels like a lot for a lot of people and a lot of players as well. It's so hard to keep on going if nothing you did counts.
Do you think is more important for making a major matter? Making it matter for the players or making it matter for the fans watching?
I think that if it matters to the players, the fans are going to follow, right? If the people that are there are going to be hype about it, if you get to see in their faces in the interviews that this mattered to them, then the personal connection should do the work. Whereas the other way around, I've seen players be really confused by, oh yeah, the fans think this is really hype. For me, it's just another Wednesday, you know. That definitely puts a damper on things. So I'd say for the players.
I think this is especially true. Oh no, you're good. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, whenever players, in all the players' interviews in the majors, all they say is it's always about this is just training for TI, right? Mm-hmm. When players keep saying that again and again and again in every interview, as a viewer, you sort of just you don't even think twice about it anymore, right? Yeah. It kills the hype for you. So I feel like as a viewer, that's where the de-hype comes. Because all the players feel like that about the major.
We've also seen that, I think about social media activity like 5 years ago around games, right? My Twitter feed would be exploding with people talking about it. And it's crickets now, honestly. Like people they don't talk about majors or the leagues or, I mean, even TI quals was weirdly dead. And so that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, when Valve ran the majors, people cared a lot more. Probably because the players cared about it more. But the money was bigger. It was like 3 million. And yeah, back then the players actually cared. Like, and when people, I remember when like Kiev major was on, people came over to my house to watch as if it were like a TI. Now it's like, even TI, people are like, I mean, maybe we'll go to Singapore to watch it, or maybe we'll go on vacation and watch a couple of days. But it's not like, there's kind of like that like shine that's gone away when it comes to these events. Possibly just because of the money and as a result the players care, but definitely because TI for too long was too big and now everything else seems so small.
I think part of it is also, and again, this is gonna be a long comparison to the CS:GO scene. Part of it is also because outside of Dota, or outside of TI, there isn't really a tournament or like a circuit to sort of like care or play about, right? Because in CS, for example, what they've built with the Louvre agreement and like with the ESL Pro League and all this sort of like this, I don't know what's called actually. It's like the Intel Grand Slam circuit. I think that's what it's called. They essentially built like this whole ecosystem that lives outside of Valve's control, right? Naturally, it's partly because Valve kind of allows it and just like so in some way also like supports it. But because this sort of like circuit exists, and you know that by being part of this tournament, you're playing for this greater sort of like accomplishment. Suddenly these events matter, and there's going to be a lot of hype for these events. And the things, Kips, that you mentioned about qualifying for one of these events, just not even a major, but just one of these events that's so prestigious. People care a lot about that. Like, well, the biggest event in CSGO is not a major. It's IEM Cologne. Whether or not it's a major, it actually kind of depends on whether or not Valve wants it to be a major. But IEM Cologne is the world championship in CSGO, and it's not an official Valve event. Let that sink in. I mean, imagine if this sort of like existed in Dota, where all right, it just doesn't have to be TI, but anything in any relevant LAN event would technically give me world fame, or give me a chance on the stage. It doesn't really exist, and it's kind of sad because, like you mentioned, this sort of like accomplishment should be rewarding for players. It should be rewarding experience for players to want to qualify for like an ESL 1 Malaysia, or I don't know, like a DreamHack Valencia or whatever. I can't actually think of a third-party event right now, which is kind of sad. So that's just a little bit unfortunate. But like you said, I think for the players right now, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the players that I've talked to, they actually kind of like the fact that it's a little bit like this, because TI is like this pipe dream, and I think this has been especially sort of like been built through OG success in the last years, and now obviously Team Spirit success as well. It's within reach. It feels like it's within reach. Once you're like in the scene, it feels like it's within reach. Like you just need one good run, and suddenly you can be at TI or maybe even win TI, right? And then you'd win, like you're set for life. Maybe not this year, but technically speaking, you'd be set for life.
I mean, this year. Well, we'll talk about the prize pool later. It's still a lot of money. Two thoughts here. I'll answer what I've experienced from Skim's question. Every player I've ever spoken to truly believes that they can win TI. They really believe it, because honestly, why are you playing if you don't? Yeah, Panla?
Same.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay. I'm good. Yeah, you talk to more than I do, so that's a good confirmation. So it's actually like really hard to convince them that a change is healthy, because none of them want to finally win it and then get the much smaller check because they got behind changing the system. And that's what we're talking about here is, should they make the majors better? And Skim, you're talking about IEM Grand Slam. Well, that's what, you win 3 in a year or an X amount of time and you get a bonus $1 million, right? That's what the Grand Slam is?
Yeah.
So that's $1 million. That's still not putting a dent in TI prize pool. So is the only way to make the majors interesting money, right? Like, is that the only thing that's gonna do anything here? There's no other bargaining chip we have to balance out the scene.
I mean, relative money, especially. I mean, and I've been quoted on this extensively for several years now, but it is my sincere opinion that TI needs to, I don't want to say to go, but it needs to be brought back into perspective in comparison to the other tournaments, because right now it just overshadows everything, and it will still do that if TI is only 100,000 and the rest are like, a gift card. That's because those are the kinds of numbers that we're talking about. So really, it just has to do with the perspective and not the amounts, like the comparison. I feel like a lot of the younger fans are hung up on that, but they'll get over that. They'll get over the fact that, Fortnite's prize pool is now bigger or whatever.
I mean, part of this is also definitely within the control of Valve. Back when there was the Valve run majors, the Manila major, the Shanghai major, the Kiev major, Boston major, and Frankfurt major, Valve were behind the scenes making comments like, oh, maybe we can talk more about the majors and how, instead of saying this is a TI winning team, let's start talking about how many majors this team has won. Because if you're only talking about TI winning teams at that stage, they're only 5 or 6, depending on which ones you're talking about. If you talk about majors, the number of teams and the narratives that you can start like differentiating between these teams. Oh, these guys won 2 majors but it was a long time ago. Like, it just becomes more interesting, and it's also like Valve sanctioned, Valve approved, so it's on the same like level of legitimacy that TI is on. So that was always a great talking point, and I think that after some of the changes that we've seen in the DPC, that's become a bit more watered down. But Valve are still in a position where they can say, when it comes to majors, let's start talking about how many majors the teams have won, and that's what people will start caring about as a result, and the players will start caring about.
The original system was 3 majors. Wasn't there a pretty big complaint from players about the schedule being too packed at 3 of them, and that's why it moved down to 2 the next year?
No, I mean, in some sense, there was some small scheduling issues, but the big thing was there were 3 majors, and their budgets were like, I think 6 million, 3 million for prize pool, 3 for production. And then the next year, the budget got slashed quite a bit, especially after Manila. Manila was like the hotel had a cheese room.
That was the business class flights, right?
Yeah, that was all the players were like, as like a quote unquote like apology for Shanghai, were given business class flights, and that was a very expensive event. And yeah, the following year for Kiev and Boston, they like halved the number of talent going. They reduced the overall budget that was allocated for the events, and I think the prize pool stayed the same because otherwise they would be rioting. But since then, the prize pool for these type of events, the whole Valve contribution has decreased quite steadily since.
I just want to point out the big smiles that went on Kips and mine faces when Ben mentioned the hotel and the cheese room. Manila, for what it's worth, was. I mean, it showed that Valve was very committed to making it a very, very nice and sort of comfortable event behind the scenes, and I miss it dearly.
You say that, but I just want to say that the Sofitel was only like 140 euros a night. Definitely not the most cheap, not the most expensive 5-star hotel or 4.5-star hotel. But the one thing to be said is that they had a slide that nearly killed 3 players and 5 talents. So if you ever do go to the Sofitel, watch out for that.
That sounds like a content piece that we all are really sad that we didn't get to see.
Yeah, Wepus went down and he hit the bottom of the pool and bounced back up. It was he was the warning sign that saved us.
Got it. Well, that's going to be my segue into talking about the pressure of qualifying for TI. Clearly the pressure was too high. There were some questionable slide choices being made. If we talk about the pressure of getting to TI, does that have an effect, right? Ponlo, are you sitting there in Regional 1 thinking about TI, or does it not really start to get to you until Regional 3?
I think for sure it's a lot more chill in Regional 1. But I think it also depends on the caliber of your team. I'm sure the teams that are like top 3 of DPC in their own region, they definitely feel the pressure a lot more than the bottom feeders like myself. Oh wait, I was in Quincy.
Underdogs.
I forgot I was in Quincy. I mean, in Quincy, I definitely felt like we had to make it, or the team was gonna disband. Pretty much, I think.
Well, that's
how
the NA experience.
Yes.
So you really got the full exposure to the NA scene right there. But that is what leads to a lot of disbands, right? Yeah. Like whether or not you think you can make it to TI, it's you can join another team that doesn't have a sponsor, right? And be making no money on the chance you go to TI. Or you can stick with your team and have a comfortable salary, but know that you probably don't have it together to win. The choice.
That's why I took a 20-hour flight and went to the US and stayed and slept on a sofa, right? Why else would I have done that? It was so that I could possibly play TI this year. So.
I mean, on the other hand, I just want to say that you have like a team like Extreme, that basically had the opportunity to go to a major and probably would have needed to do pretty well, like top 3, top 4. And they would have got an invite to TI, and they couldn't get one of their players, so they just said, no, we're not going to go. So there is a little bit of pushback in that, like, if you don't have things perfect, you'd rather not do it. But, I mean, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the parallels. Some teams, they'll do anything just for a chance, just for a tiny little chance to make it. And other teams are given an opportunity and they say, no, this isn't for us. We don't want to just go to TI. We want to go to TI on our terms, and we want to go with our full team, because if we make it to TI and we're not 5, we might have doubts about how we would get here. If we had to play with a stand, and there was rumors that they were going to use certain players as replacement for the major, and then they said, no, we're not going to come at all. So I find that kind of interesting to see this diversity. Maybe Pondo's got some inside info as a member of the Chinese DPC.
I don't think that they were. I don't think at that point. I don't think that they were that strong. I think it was more of them not feeling confident that they would do well at the major with because they had to get like top 4 or something, right? To get enough points for TI, they had to do really well at the major. So I think they sort of forgo that trying to be an opportunist, and just like they stuck to screaming the entire month and grinding it out, so that because they knew that they were one of the top teams for China qualifiers, right? The China regionals. It was them and RNG and IG. Yeah. I think they made the right choice to do that.
Yeah, that's just an indication of more planning, more care about how they make it, because like you say, if they go to the major, going to an event is always a gamble. If you lose the event in a bad way, it can completely destroy your team. So I kind of respect their decision enough. Sorry.
Oh, also I think they were worried about travel complications too, because at that point of time, I think Shanghai wasn't open yet. If you left Shanghai, you might not be able to go back, and they might have had to spend the entire 1.5 months in Malaysia or something. So I think they wanted to avoid that too. That's why. Yeah.
All of this that we're talking about, right? So how teams get to TI, whether or not, throwing back to what we said earlier about the qualifiers aren't as exciting. I mean, do you remember the TI4 hub? Right? Yeah. There was those streams that we used to have. That was something everybody rallied around to see which teams were going to go. We don't get that anymore. Our open qualifier is 4 months, 5 months ahead of time. And the opens for getting to Division 2 of the 3rd regional. Do TI qualifiers need to change? Both, right, points from the major, importance of regional leagues, and when the open quals are? Or is this stable but slightly less exciting format maintain fairness and predictability?
I just want to say that there's a little bit of history here. Is that at the start, it was kind of like a free-for-all to do regionals. And then there were hubs that were created, and then there was drama because some talents didn't get invited to some hubs. So there was the multiple hubs, and there was the BTS hub and the Moonduck hub, and Join Dota joined the BTS hub, and it was, there was drama back then, but the end product for the consumer was more variety, and it was really interesting, and they were competing in some sense. And then it merged back into one, and then there was a bit of drama because nobody ended up joining the lobbies and casting, so no one could watch via Dota TV. So then Valve said, okay, well, we'll pay $100 a game, and we'll choose some official casters, and those casters will be in the lobby casting, and if you're a hub, you can do whatever you want. But some of the people that they chose were at the hubs, so they had to join the game and cast, and then we got kind of the best output is we had these hubs where people were there having a good time, chatting, and there was official coverage in every single lobby, so that if you were a viewer who doesn't have super good internet, you can't join in via stream. You can always watch in-game or after the game from the VOD. You have good commentary in every single game. So those were all great. I liked all of those. And now we're in a situation where you only have bedroom casts for it, and there's no hubs, there's no panels.
Is that a travel restriction issue, a budget issue, this isn't hype enough, we're not going to bother selling sponsors, right? Like what happened? There's a pandemic, okay? Can we blame it on that and sort of the additional logistics, or is this really just less and less emphasis being put into it?
I think you could solve some of the problems at least. Like, for example, a lot of people, even though they are not necessarily like living in exactly the same place, you could still get people in the same geographical location, even if it's just as a casting duo to cast. Like, I know that T-Panda and I have proposed this before. Like, we both live in Finland about an hour and a half from each other. If we get a qualifier to cast, we can like go to a town roughly in the middle and cast from the same place. And I'm sure those options exist all over the world. A lot of people have co-casters or, people that they like to work with pretty decently close by. It doesn't have to necessarily be everybody all together in one hub with the kittens and the midnight snacks. There's certainly a middle ground between what we have now, which are the completely separate bedroom casts, and the hubbub of the heydays.
I totally agree. I think there is probably at least a middle ground. I'm not sure. I mean, there are probably some restrictions in place that make it impossible to get the old hubs. But I do think, as you said, middle ground is sort of at least possible. But what I will say is, though, and I don't want to really slight anybody because I wasn't part of the process, but I've heard a lot of complaints from the Brazilian Dota community in particular, that a lot of the talent that were selected or reached out to, and for the qualifiers, includes people that haven't played or broadcast a game of Dota in almost like a year or maybe even longer, who have no affiliation anymore with the game, have since moved on to other games, and this sort of it gives off the look. Again, I don't want to put the blame on anybody in particular, but it gives us the look that whoever was in charge of this wasn't particularly invested into trying to figure out what the best possible solution was for this. Because if they had, there's tons of people to reach out to. I mean, D2 Bowie, naming him because I think he's one of the most prolific sort of like talents to come out of the scene, who's transitioned since to doing English content, right? At the very least, you could probably reach out to him, even if you're not inviting him, because as far as I know, he's not been invited. Even if you're not inviting him, surely he can make recommendations regarding who's sort of a good fit for the Portuguese or for the Brazilian broadcast, right? And it just seems a little bit worrying that this is sort of like happening, because then you have to ask yourself the question: if they're not putting effort into that, if they're not even putting effort into selecting talent who at the very least have been associated with the game, what else are they not putting effort into, right? And then that's when the questions come in: is it? And then when you start wondering, is it really based on any sort of like political or like pandemic related restrictions, or is it actually just, it's kind of like whatever? It's like an afterthought effect, essentially.
Yeah.
I just need to say, sorry, Kips. Imagine, it's not a bad idea, Skim, but imagine if someone reaches out to you and says, "Hey, we don't want to hire you. Like, you're talent, but you're not talented enough for us. But hey, who you got? Who can you help us out with?" Oh my goodness.
You got me right, Skim. You got me right. Tell me you got me, man.
I mean, one thing is that wasn't just in Brazil. That was also in the English cast. There were a lot of casters who were invited who haven't really done commentary in a while. They reached out to Mo Farah like a month after he said, "Hey, I'm quitting Dota casting. I've got other things. Like, I'm done with this." And they still reached out to him. I think Breaky CPK they invited, and he was like, "What? Like, they haven't spoken to me on this before. Like, I had no idea they were going to ask me. I haven't really casted a Dota event for 3 years, and they're inviting me." There are a bunch of people who were just invited out of the blue, and that's cool in terms of giving opportunities. But if the original idea of the people who are inviting them was to give ideas and opportunities, then why don't they do that throughout the DPC season, first of all? Why do they only do it now? And second of all, why is the budget so essentially was the budget so low? So there was definitely rumors and behind the scenes discussions on the amounts of pay that was being offered, and it was being quite low. I mean, if you're casting a TI, essentially wild card or a group stage, you should be getting pretty reasonable money. This is the biggest event of the year. But first of all, you're not being flown out. You're having to cast from home in your bedroom. Your first TI for many people you're casting from your bedroom. Second of all, you're not getting paid as well as like average people. I mean, I got paid more than some of these people doing stats 7 years ago at a TI, and that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
These people are way more like these people are putting in huge hours. They're doing like great job, and they're right at the top. They should be getting compensated very fairly. They shouldn't be getting like 2/3 or half of the money I got 7 years ago. I just think the whole situation has become like a money-related exercise, and also a lot of the invites are just based on politics. At least it seems that way. Some of the people who weren't invited are like, why? And some of the people who were invited are like, okay, that's cool, but
why? Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna play my own violin here, but like both of my favorite play-by-plays got invited, and they both got paired with somebody else that they haven't really worked with before. Like, what's up with that? I've been here for years, and it's
that's true too. That's true. Yeah. And also, like, they invited some people, and then they're like, oh, we don't even know who we're gonna pay you with, and then they didn't even think to stop then and be like, okay, so we got 5 play-by-plays and 2 analysts. We need 3 more analysts. They didn't even stop there. They just carried. It's like almost like they had a list and they didn't know who they were inviting. They were cold calling casters. Like that's what it seemed like. And this is such a contrast to. I remember back in like TI4, TI5, there was like sheets of who would cast, like who were the like best casting pairs. Like it was all optimized around making the best product no matter the cost. And now it's just let's make the best product within our budget.
When I noticed.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to mention to the financial part of things, Ben, what you mentioned. I remember there was a time when a talent at TI, at the very least, like the top talent that would also do like playoffs. There was a time when their TI money. I'm not saying that what they got paid at TI was necessarily that much. It's just that because of the sort of like the work outside of TI was rather at the time still sort of like underpaid, right? But there was a time when getting paid at TI was essentially your work for the year. Like you got so much, you got a sufficient amount of money that could actually carry you throughout the rest of the year, because other events at the time didn't really pay a lot. And now it's kind of gone the other way around, where, well, not entirely, but there's definitely some talent that can work at events outside of the DPC circuit and make more and significantly more, sometimes even, than what they would get working DPC or even TI. And that's just kind of, it's just sad, really, because it shouldn't be that way. It should, TI, we have that much money already. We've been talking about how much prize money there's been. Again, yeah, sure, this year it's a little bit less than that, I guess, but there's so much money in this ecosystem, but it goes to just one particular place, or well, we 1.5 if we're, I guess, but it's just really, well, it's just sad, yeah.
Okay, so money in this ecosystem. I want to move us on to the next topic for a little bit and talk about, there is so much money in this ecosystem, but the TI prize pool looks like there's a lot less money in the ecosystem this year. So I've seen some theories, right? So some of the Arcanas are paywalled a lot higher than normal. There's not the old community challenges like there used to be. But I got to tell you, I remember that Wind and Quap Arcanas being super paywalled, and that TI still breaking the ceiling. So why is this prize pool so low?
I think one of the reasons is that the Battle Pass got released particularly late in comparison to the other ones, right? The lead up to usually the Battle Pass was released, I want to say like 2 months prior to TI, or maybe like 2.5 even. And
it's more, but the prize tracker starts everybody at day 0 and then draws the line.
Right.
Even this year's, with the same amount of time, is sitting below 3 other TIs. And my graphic is really hard for me to tell, but I think it's sitting below 2017 today still. So 2017, 2018, and our 2021, I guess. It's still below all of those.
By this stage, how many of the other TIs had pressed the first button of nitrous oxide, which is the treasure 2? How many of them had done that? Because that's really where it boils down to a lot of the times, is just when that second treasure comes out and the spike happens. That's like the only real control that Valve have, is being able to release more content. I think the shape every year is basically the same, and the height, like the amplitude, is just based on the quality of the battle pass itself. This one seems particularly grindy. And I think, didn't they also they also announced that every dollar earned after the prize pool, the TI ends doesn't go into the prize pool. So
yeah, and they're releasing the second half of content. There's like a whole second half coming post. Yeah.
So part of it's the quality of the content, I guess, and then part of it's also the fact that people don't feel that there's like an immediate deadline that's coming up. I think it's just procrastination. Because some of the people who want to get the level 1000 will just press the button closer to the end.
I mean the 4 arcanas or whatever that is in this battle pass is like they released the 4th one, which is a void, which is like level 500, and they didn't release the 150 and the 400 ones, right? It's like for me, I just didn't even buy the battle pass for myself because I don't want to spend money to get a level 500. But maybe if the arcana at level 150 is like kind of nice and it's like one of my heroes, maybe I'll buy a level 150 one. I think it's just a bad idea to. Why are you withholding the arcanas of the earlier levels? I don't really understand that.
And you want to see what it looks like before you invest.
Like exactly. Like if you release the earlier ones.
This year's marketing plan, right? Make everybody think the battle pass is going to suffer, right? Get everybody panicked that the prize pool is low, and then hit the gas with like everything all at once so that they can have the biggest spike. Maybe that's the plan, and definitely not that they just don't have the assets yet.
Yeah, it's a pity that they didn't have maybe this is one of the biggest shames in Dota is that they didn't know ahead of time that they would need these assets. Poor Valve, they didn't know when TI was going to be.
Yeah, didn't know. Okay, I think we're getting close to the time that we want. Because it's time to wrap up this episode. If you have no idea who's been talking this entire time, I'm Reinessa. We got Kips, analyst, caster, stats, all kind of wonderful things. Noxville, the man behind Dota, the site that I use to come up with anything that ever sounds smart about Dota. Onlo, the pro player who does not believe in himself, apparently. And Skim, who I believe we have to thank for kind of pulling this whole thing together. So that's your crew. This is the International Pinnacle Roundtable Talks. Thanks for hanging out with us, and there will be more episodes to come, so we'll see you soon.